how safe can you truly be? What's safe is safe, really.
Yeah. And again, I've seen it over and over again. People think that they're safe, or government officials think they're safe, but it doesn't make any difference. Once that the masses get together and they just go for it, it doesn't matter how many police, how many army, how many people in uniform with guns and everything. It doesn't make any difference. When someone is more committed than the defenders, it's game over. I've seen it so many times now. And that is, again, tipping point theory. We always reach the tipping point.
Hey, and good afternoon, everyone. Today, Neil McCoy Ward. We're going to discuss things that are happening right now, how these problems might affect you directly, and then some solutions so you can protect yourselves, your families, and get ready for these changes that are coming in so swift, all encompassing, but it's going to happen in a blink of an eye. Because can you remember January 1st, 2022, Happy New Year, just a few months back? Well, these changes we're talking about are going to happen that quickly. Everything we talk about today, at least on my end, and the very first step into what I would consider a reset of our society, not in the Klaus Schwab way, but literally a reset based on disposable income, food pricing, energy prices. This affects everybody directly. What you eat, what your kids eat, what your family has access to in the supermarkets. We'll be here no later than the end of September, no first week of October. So if we trace that out, we're looking at about 5 months. And we discussed a little bit before what we wanted to cover. So I think it's just going to be an easy conversation with some solutions. So everybody kick back, enjoy. And then, we are going to discuss the problem first, but we're not going to go into fear, the doom, and the gloom. That's not what this is about. It's understanding the problem and be able to find some solutions. So Neil, thank you and welcome.
From my experience, when I was a soldier, 10 years, I've been to a lot of countries. I think I've racked up 72, 73 countries in my life. So I've been to a lot of places, and I've seen a lot of social unrest and breakdown. And I've, through bad luck, been right in the middle of something when there's been a major breakdown. It was actually in Nanyuki in Kenya. So I'll never forget it. I was in Nanyuki in Kenya, and there was some sort of an election issue. And I was right in the middle of town, and the whole thing just erupted, and it was absolute chaos. And yet the day before, these people were laughing and joking with one another. So I've seen how fast it turns. South Africa, more recently, was another one. That was not on the mainstream media, but I tell you, David, that was, I won't even say some of the things that happened there. It was so horrific. Things just turn around really quickly. But you may have seen on some other social media how the malls had all been burned down and everything had been looted. And I mean, that was the very calm aspects of it, I would say. These things do turn around very quickly. And, there's the old expression about food and, how many meals you are away from carnage and everything around that. I personally don't think, just from my experiences, that the majority of people are prepared. And I don't think they're prepared physically by having the tools and the veg and the skills to grow, or having that storage, being prepared with their, even simple things like Mylar bags, oxygen absorbers, and grains. And I just don't think people are prepared. They rely on the mainstream media to educate and tell them, and the media just isn't telling them any of this. So the average person thinks, I don't need to prepare anything. Well, I can tell you for a fact what will happen if we do see food shortages, because we've seen it hundreds of times before. It's always the same pattern. All the civilized society by day 3, some of them by day 2, but day 3, day 4, day 5 at the most is out the window. And people will do anything they have to in order to get food for them, for their family. They will do anything. And I've seen it over and over again. Human beings are not, you hear this a lot, that we're now more refined and our generation is very intelligent and all this. It's not true. Human nature has not changed in a very long time. And I would argue, if you look at again, watch for all of your subscribers to watch that Great Depression series, that 3-part series, the people back then were so respectful. Tip your hat. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. That's how people were, very respectful to one another. And yet watch that diary series and you'll see what happened even in that society. It was not a good situation. So I think this is what's going to happen. I think everyone should be prepared for what's coming. However you think, you should prepare as an individual, that's completely up to you and your family. But I would take some action for sure.
And if I could add a point about South Africa, because I watched as many videos as I could about what was happening down there, seeing that as a blueprint for what could happen, maybe not in every nation, but some. And one thing I noticed first is the storage facilities, like the U-Store, the self-storage, those were the first things looted. So if you're getting into the preparedness mindset and you say, well, I have a whole bunch of stuff, my house is full, we still have more thing, I'm just going to get a storage shed because those things are protected, nobody's going to get in there, they're locked up. That was the very first thing that was hit, which was surprising. Then you can start thinking about caching things and whatnot, but storing it somewhere else outside your own protective zone there. And speaking of the protection, if you have a carload of SUV of armed guys coming up, that's a direct thing. You can confront that with your neighbors. But what the scariest thing is a family with starving kids knocking on your door. That confrontation there or that interaction is going to be, that'll scar you for life, because it's not like an armed intruder coming up. That's a direct threat. You know what's going to happen there. But an innocent family, my kids are harmed, we haven't eaten in 4 days, look at this, or, that's going to be a rough one to get through there. So you're not going to be able to feed everybody. And being as remote as I am, I still don't feel I'm remote enough. How remote is remote? I'm living in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. You have to balance somewhere between what you can do for work, what your lifestyle is, what you're willing to give up, what you're willing to adapt to in terms of new lifestyles, meeting new people, starting new habits, etc. But think about the safety aspect of storing what you have, because South Africa was a huge, huge wake-up call, and Sri Lanka as well. Those were huge ringed in fenced areas in the government facilities and buildings and private politicians. Plus they had their own security, and they still were just overrun in just minutes when you watch those crowds go through. So how safe can you truly be? What's safe is safe, really.
Yeah. And again, I've seen it over and over again. People think that they're safe, or government officials think they're safe, but it doesn't make any difference. Once that the masses get together and they just go for it, it doesn't matter how many police, how many army, how many people in uniform with guns and everything. It doesn't make any difference. When someone is more committed than the defenders, it's game over. I've seen it so many times now. And that is, again, tipping point theory. We always reach the tipping point in every one of these situations. Yeah.
So tipping point, maybe let me run a couple timelines by you, and I'm just going to see if you agree or disagree with this one. Now, I was picking up on those fertilizer shortages, at least 4 or 5 months ago when CF Industries first announced that there would be fertilizer shortages. And I started to dive into like fertilizerdaily.com and AgFacts, and I follow all the ag news because I live out in a farming community. I go to the farm co-ops. Oh, by the way, for those of you in the States here, if you are looking to purchase bulk seed, you're going to want to go to the farmers co-ops. They're in every single county, and you're going to buy a 50-pound bag. Currently, we got some hard red winter wheat. It was $17 for a 50-pound bag, but last year it was $9. So you're looking at, and fertilizer, they're running out of the pre-mix like 10-10 or the 10-10-10 or the 6-12-12 or the 15s. I'm buying now the 4500, and just, you're going to have to start mixing your own, or 046. You're going to have to get your own ingredients and then start mixing those up. That's a new skill set, but all you need is a scale or a cup, and then 1 cup of this, 1 cup of that, 1 cup of that. Okay, that's your ratio. So the fertilizer's coming in right now. we're not at the end of planting season in the Northern Hemisphere just yet. It will be coming up in another couple of weeks. We'll be at the very end of the planting season, and then farmers will get a good gauge of their intended planting, which the USDA uses as their forecast output and yield numbers at the end of the year, is based on what the farmers did for their intended planting. Well, that was done months ago, before the diesel shortages, before the repair parts shortages for farm machinery, before the fertilizer and the herbicide bottlenecks. That was way back then. So as we progress into now, there's been a lot of farmers who didn't plant what they were supposed to or intended to. Now, when we come into the farm tours, this is where it's going to start waking up the planet, when we really get into the end of July and August, when we get into the farm tours. And then September is the first delivery, at least what I would consider the good delivery here, coming up for some of the ag products off the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. That's going to set the world alight. I would say a good 50% of the people will understand at the end of August what's happening. And by the time we get to October, when the full harvests are coming in, and that's all that's on the news is how much food was not grown, where the food shortages is, and they're pressing the fear button again in the media, then I think the rest of the plan is going to wake up. So that's kind of my timeline going out for the next 5 months. But how's society going to react to that is the thing. You know, once people get this information, are they truly, you've seen more about, conflict areas, the conflict's coming. Okay. Like, how do people really react? Does 100% of people go into motion? No way. So what's the percentages of, you think, people really getting ready once the whole world's aware of what's happening? How many are going to be spurred to action to actually really do something at that point?
Yeah, well, a lot of people. But it's a good point you mentioned, because I have a lot of friends who are police officers. They're more senior now because they've been in a long time. But they shared some interesting stories with me about the lockdown periods in 2020. Pretty gruesome, I would say, more stories. But that is that a lot of the older people, so you're talking people who were at home, or, they would go out to the store, they'd, get their milk and their bread and whatever, and they'd come home, that sort of thing. Well, they didn't have a lot of, that generation, they didn't have a lot of food at home and things like that. And also with the heating, a lot of them turned off their heating. This is quite common, David, in the UK. If a lot of Americans always surprised when I say this, but a lot of the older people, the British people, they actually turn off their heating to try and save money, right? So they do this. Now, this is actually expanded. It's exploded at the moment, where a lot of the older people and younger now families are turning off their heating to save money. It's called heat or eat. Do I heat my home or do I eat, basically? So some families are skipping meals, some are turning off heating. Well, actually what happened was, after the sort of lockdown periods ended, there were a lot of calls from neighbors. Oh, I haven't seen Eileen or Ethel or George in, a long time. Knocked on the door, no one's answering. Well, when these police officers were going around and they were knocking on these doors and kicking the doors in, they were finding loads of these people who had died during the lockdowns for whatever reason it was, heating or whether it was food or whatever. Pretty horrific tales, all these things. So this builds again a pattern. You also had the people who were absolutely, I'm not getting locked down. I'm going to go to the store and I'm going to bang on that door and get them to give me some food. So you see these sort of extremes in every society. But then you have the other people, and these are the ones that what's known as early adopters. So what they do is they go out whenever there's any sort of indication of a lockdown or a crisis, and they strip the shelves bare. And we saw that with toilet paper, and we saw it with a lot of other foods. Now, here's the reason that I'm always baffled by it, because a lot of the group, they don't think clearly. So they'll go and they'll just buy all the fresh food, they'll fill their shopping thing with it, and then their cart or their trolley, and then they'll check out. But here's the problem with that. They're not thinking, okay, I need to think a few weeks in advance or months. They just think, I need to get this fresh food now, because that's what they're familiar with. They're familiar with fresh food because they haven't been educated on grains and long life food and how to prepare food and how to store it and how to use it sparingly and things like that. So I think that's the same pattern that we're going to see all over again. People are just going to go out, they're going to rush to the stores, they're going to strip the shelves. I actually did a very interesting video, and it was from March of 2020. And I went to the biggest supermarket in Europe, and I went around, and this thing is huge, enormous. And I went around and I was filming. There wasn't a single item on the shelves. The entire store, apart from there was some bottles of champagne and, a bag of salt or something, the entire store had been stripped bare. There was nothing, no fresh food, no fresh vegetables, no meat, no packets of anything. It was just all gone. So I think this is when we look at these patterns, and again, I share that story because every single person watching this can relate to that, because they went out, they saw the people that were panicking and buying up all the food. So now that we know that pattern, what do we do against it? Well, we prepare early, and we make sure that, again, going back to what I said before, that we understand food a little better, and grains and long life food and cooking, and we just make sure that we're prepared for it.
Fresh foods too, dehydrator.
Mm-hmm.
If you have the chance to get a dehydrator now, or get even extra trays for the dehydrator, or buy two in case one breaks, I could have taken that fresh food and I could have stored that up. I could have dehydrated. I could have turned, leafy greens into powders that I could then mix with water later. Mm-hmm. And the salt, I would take that in a second, and the vinegar too, because then you can start to ferment and do things like sauerkraut or pickles. And, salt and vinegar are going to be some of your most valuable things that you can have on site. And different types of vinegar too, the apple cider vinegar for digestion, et cetera. But then the white vinegars for being able to can. And you're going to need the jars with that, the lids, that sort of thing. But, thinking about food storage also, how do you keep rodents out of your grains? Because I tell you what, mice like wheat berries that you're going to grind into flour just as much as you like eating bread. Mm-hmm. And rodents are going to be something, look through history. How many times have grain yields been ruined by rodent infestation? Yeah. So many. So then bring it back on the home level. Well, do you have plastic tubs to store it in? Can you put some hot chili peppers around in your tubs so nothing wants to get in there? How do you seal that off? I've had hit or miss results with the pressurized, the things that are in the bag, the Eversaves or something like this, where you put it in and it sucks all the air out, and vacuum packers. Hit or miss, sometimes the meats will hold, sometimes they won't. So it's an experiment in progress. Like you mentioned, the oxygen absorbers when you want to put something up. And then how much of that you put up will really store, because we canned some stuff last time and we had not a whole bunch, but many of the lids didn't seal correctly. And I thought we had that thing long enough in the water bath for sure to be able to make those lids lock down. But they didn't. So, we lost several cans of that, and there's nothing you can do. You don't want to get botulism and get sick. So you just pour it out. And food storage, that's a huge, huge thing that not many people are thinking about. And I love the way you're thinking about the grains too, because not only can you sprout those for microgreens, example, wheat. If you know how to do any kind of microgreen sprouting, you can take those wheat berries and turn it into wheat grass. Mm-hmm. The health food store stuff where you go get a shot of wheat grass for like $18 or whatever it is now. That's superfood. And that's what you need to think about. How do you bring your stored food into something green matter in a superfood fashion that can also give you those micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, and the fats are going to be a big thing also to keep your brain functioning correctly. No fat, no thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. And I can relate, because when we were doing the oxygen absorbers, we found that one lot that we purchased, it didn't matter what we did, it just wouldn't seal. And we thought, is it the bag? Is it the seal? What is it? And we realized, oh no, they were all coming out of the same pack. So sometimes you might get a bad batch of them. Sometimes, we usually throw a lot more in than we need to, and then just check that it's sealed. And and it's not just that as well. If you think about growing vegetables, growing crops, it's amazing how much of it you will lose to. See, we didn't know that we had a slug infestation here in our garden. We had no idea. So we have all this stuff all planted, everything's looking great. And then within a couple of days, it's all gone. We lost pretty much all of it to slugs. what has happened? And we found, oh, there were slugs everywhere. So we had to get all those out. But then you have other things coming in. You have, it is a learning curve for everyone watching. You've got to sort of start doing it hobby growing now, I would say, to cut out all of these mistakes, because when it comes to real thing, you're probably going to have to plant twice what you need in order to actually keep a lot of it. Aphids were another one that got our other plants, aphids. These are all things to look forward to, ladies and gents. Yeah.
Yeah, we got guinea fowl for that very reason, because they'll get in there and eat the insects. Now, Neil, I've heard also to smother under your plants with sand, at least here in East Tennessee, that's how they do it, because there are a lot of things that are crawling on the ground that want to then go up the stem, and also putting in raised beds. But adding a layer of sand under your plants seems to work here. Now, I don't know if it's a one-all solution for everywhere, but anything that has sort of that mucus coating on the body, including caterpillars that might be down there, and sprinkle a little diatomaceous clay in with the sand, seems to be the winner. Because I know the old timers here, they don't plant pumpkin or anything unless it's in a sand bed around, because they don't want it. If it's really mission critical and you're going to starve if you don't grow that food, and you get a massive loss like that, then what? Because we've seen this through history where entire crops are wiped out, and you see regions completely empty out. They just put everything on the wagons. They're like, there's no food, we got to go elsewhere. And this whole population migration thing is another thing. I call it the fingerprints of the grand solar minimum. Like, if you go back to these epochs of history, and about every 400 years, you run into another one of these mass population migration events, collapse of the economy, where asset values they just don't hold. So there's no base anymore for an economy to function. And then the governments have to think of a different way to oversee and farm the people. And then it resets itself, of course, but you get these same three things that just reoccur with frequency and regularity going back in time. If you're going to grow your own food, moving through 2022, this whole awareness in October is going to freak people out. The markets might not be able to fill the contracts that are on the futures, commodities exchanges, because there's going to be a lack of corn of about 35% globally. The numbers, I'm not going to go any higher than that, but I'm conservative enough to say that I would anticipate a 35% reduction in global corn this year output. But then when people wake up, that's okay. Their light bulb goes on, and wow, we need to grow some food. What happens when it comes into springtime next year, when the supply chains are not functional and there aren't enough farm implements, tools, seeds, that sort of thing, for just the home gardener to get it on and, move their production forward? Then we get into this next crisis, this next bottleneck. People understand the solution, what it is, but they can't implement the solution because the physical goods just aren't there. Then what really is, how do you even overcome that next step? Because you can see it playing out. Okay, this is step one. Then we go to step two.
Yeah, well, it's a good point. And that's why people should be buying the tools that they need now for the future. I mean, inflation is just going to keep going. It's not as if it's going to just go away. Something that's in motion tends to stay in motion. And when we're seeing more energy inputs, we're seeing more food inputs, it's going to keep pushing into inflation. Whenever the way to think about almost anything, tools or clothing or whatever you're thinking about, is everything starts and ends with energy. So it's the energy inputs that actually pushes up the pricing of a lot of things. Of course, there's a lot more variables to it, but I just want to oversimplify it so people can think in that way and always think about the energy. But what would happen? How would that play out? People can't get the tools. There would then be a pull on the supply chain. Whoever in whatever country would just ramp up production. And it's not even as simple as saying, well, in the United States or in the UK, local companies would ramp up production, because they probably haven't got the metal and some of the other things that they need, the sort of raw materials. They probably won't have that. They'll need to, again, create a pull on the chain to get those raw materials in. And again, a lot of the companies don't even manufacture the tools, even though they might have an American flag on, a British flag on. A lot of it is coming from elsewhere, or it's put together in the US or put together in the UK. So it will create this pull. We'll then see it ramping up in China or whatever country does it. but you're going to see a long lag, a long delay, where you just won't have the things you need available. But then later on, a lot further down the line, like the toilet roll, you're just going to see it all flood in, and then it's going to be piled high. But it does take time. It's not just a quick thing. It will take time. But in the interim, those tools and things that are available, again, supply and demand, when we think of the currency units and number of people, the price goes up on that equipment, on those tools.
What do you think the demand destruction price will be in terms of food and implements that you could get at your hardware stores? I mean, how high does it really get before people just pull back and go, whoa, it's far too expensive now. I can't afford that. Borderline hyperinflation, a 4x increase, but really, what do you think the demand destruction price percentage-wise is?
Well, it's more a case of when we come, again, let's bring it back to supply and demand and tipping point theory. How much is the food versus how much are the tools and the seed and whatever else you're gonna use? So if the food is so high that it's almost unaffordable, but the tools and the seeds and other things are less, then people would flip to that. You've always got to think of it as these two sides, and where is that tipping point? That's what I always look to. For most of my forecasts, I use a few basic models. It will be Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which most people understand. And I often focus on the first two tiers of Maslow to understand not just how people move through the tiers to self-actualization, which is the pinnacle, but also looking at it from the reverse as to how do they focus and prioritize. It's one model. Supply and demand, tipping point theory. If you just look at these very simple models that anyone at home can understand, these are usually a good starting point when you want to try and figure something out and you want to try and make even a very basic forecast on what might happen. I would say those models will serve you well.